Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus here with a review of the Revoltech Getter Robo Go! And I should be right up front and honest with you, I do not know anything about Getter Robo Go, except that it had working toys back in the 80s, and that this Revoltech is probably based a whole lot more on a manga that I know nothing of. This piece of military getter hardware was provided by the acronym known as HLJ. And he's got quite a crisp sculpt for a Revoltech, especially up here in the face. Revoltech sculpts, especially head sculpts, can tend to be a little bit chewing gum, and this one turned out better than I expected, especially those little lines on his mouth. His poseability is that of your average Revoltech. The revolver joints in the shoulders and elbows accomplish what they're supposed to do. The hip ones are a little bit more protruding than I'd have liked, and the placement does make it a little bit harder for this guy to do a normal stance. Neo Getter and Getter Dragon were a bit better at that, in my opinion. The knee one is also not bad. It has a huge gap, but here's a cool little design bit. You can cover it, sort of, with a kneecap flap. This flap only really covers everything when the knee's bent this far. If you bend it farther to take advantage of the double joint compression hinge, you can still fold this kneecap up, but you'll see joint, you'll see gap, you'll see all kinds of stuff in there. And these things are just simple hinge and pegs, and kind of loosely connected ones at that. In the ankles, the revolver joints, as with many Revoltechs, are a little bit funny to work with when you want to get them to be tilted to the side. And in his chest, there's a whole bunch of assembly here to try to cover for the gaps from bending the Revoltech joint, not just in the front, but also over here in the back. He's got this additional set of panels here which can kind of cover for things. Double-jointed red revolver joints also are fitted to each rocket booster, and there are divots cut in so the boosters can clip in nice and tight to his back like this and just pose around like that, or you can extend them out like thus and get a whole lot more posing options, going so far as to make them look like they can fire off his shoulder. If they do that in the fiction, then that is awesome. His neck is not on a revolver joint. It's on a pair of similarly thin pegs and hinges, much like his knee flaps. I'm a little bit of two minds about this. I do like the free range of motion and the lack of clicking, but these pegs are so thin, there's something insecure about them just by their very nature. And that goes to his hands as well. These are not huge, thick pegs. These are also very thin. And the only problem I have with these thin pegs, aside from potential durability issues in the future, is that they just don't seem to connect in very substantially. They are not nearly as tight as other Revoltech hands I've messed with. Granted, that can be a good thing. Maujin Kaiser's hands are way the hell too tight. On the bright side, he does still have the ability to stand fairly solidly once you get all of his joints clicked into a proper position, and in lieu of the usual black Revoltech stand, you get a clear one. It's got a white revolver joint, so you can do some flight poses by ramming that straight into the peg hole in his posterior, and now you can have him float, you can have him float horizontally or vertically. It's all good, but there is one more attachment that was added in, and I'm kind of into it. I'm not entirely sure if it accomplishes everything it needs to, and I'm not sure if it does things that this couldn't already do itself. But this waist clip can be fitted onto the revolver joint, and by affixing this to the white revolver joint, you can now facilitate flying poses that don't involve the posterior peg, and that don't result in Getter Go having to wrap his legs around either side of the stem of the stand. So it's neat. It lets him fly higher, if you will, in a given display shelf than most other Revoltechs can accomplish. But I'm not sure if it was entirely necessary, because now you also have all this junk up in front of him. And it does add to the accessory count, because aside from getting a little orange box full of hands and heads and bullets and whatnot, you also get all this stuff that does not fit inside the box. Let's check it out! As with many robot toys from the Far East, you get multiple pairs of hands. You've got fists. You've got hands outstretched to grab things or just show you that he has hands. And you've got hands for holding things. The hands have a new bit of doohickey to them, which is that they've all got a wrist joint, but they're also all mounted via fairly thin pegs. The wrist joint is a great addition, but the thin pegs, not so much. I kind of wish they were thicker. It's not like they're hard to stick in or out, it's just that they don't really stick in solidly at all. But the addition of wrist poseability to every pair of hands is a nice touch, and the holding things hands even have the wrist oriented in such a way so that you can point weapons downward or more forwards, and not just weaving the hand in or out like this. And what's a proper super robot without some kind of rage mode? I don't actually know if that's what this is called. I'm just kind of substituting things because of the hands. Basically, you swap in a new head and add some cannons to his wrist components. Which, by the way, are kind of frustratingly easy to pop off, because again, they use extremely thin pegs to plug into place, and there's not enough friction, at least on this one. These cannons, though, go in very solidly, and the new head, you can see that he's gained some jaws and some pupils, and that's kind of a neat effect. It harkens back to Shin Getter for me. Or at least the Shin Getter style. I also just love the aesthetic of having a robot's faceplates crack open into jaws. It's kind of tasty. Rage mode isn't the only iteration of this guy that you can create, though. He's also got what appears to be a more military set of hardware. Swapping his wrist braces and giving him a truly epic hand cannon will result in this. Now Getter is packin'! The Metal Beast hand cannon is easily the most visually stark and eye-catching part of this setup, and unfortunately, it's also one of the greatest highlights of my problem with the wrist joints and the thin pegs involved in this Revoltech, because, he has a lot of trouble keeping this thing upright. It's a real shame. That aside, though, on this arm, he's also got some, ammo holsterage. These giant bullets are each removable. You do get 5 of them. The thing is, they're all slightly different in dimension, at least on mine, so these two really like to stay inside that thing. These two can kind of stay in that thing until you turn him around, and then they fall out. Also, some of them are too thick to go into the opening chamber of the Metal Beast. So there's one in here that kind of likes to go in there. However, I've had one go in here that went in super tight, and I had a whole lot of trouble getting back out. All my griping aside, I do want to point out that there's a really cool final bit of gimmickry involving the bullets in the gun. The splayed open hands have been sculpted so they can also hold one of the bullets, like this. And through that, you can facilitate some poses that make him look like he's loading a brand new shot of pure Metal Beast death into his hand cannon, and that is kind of cool. His other replacement wrist piece is the Plasma Sword, and this thing is pretty simple. It folds out, and he can cut some fools with it. Getter Go also has this alternate effects stand piece, which, as far as I can tell, just makes it look like he is stomping on the ground. It does allow for some pretty cool action poses, though, and can add a bit of comic bookness to your display shelf.
Tomahawk!
It is a mighty big blade. The sword Tomahawk is kind of the crowning accessory of Getter Go, and it's the reason why a lot of people tend to look at this guy, myself included. This is a really big sword! It's got the Tomahawk nature of this, I suppose guard down here, but really just the length of it, man, the length of it. It stands out so hugely compared to a lot of other accessories, not just Revoltech accessories, but accessories on a similarly scaled shelf. Also, the sword is extremely rigid and feels pretty durable, though I wouldn't bend it too much. Unfortunately, the sword, much like the handgun, really brings into light just how loose these wrist pegs are. But that aside, it's a very cool looking weapon, and definitely a reason to look into this guy all by itself. Getter Robo Go is a very decent modern Revoltech. I like his accessories a lot. In fact, if this was his only accessory, I would be totally happy and jazzed. Every additional piece really ups the value on this guy, and also gives him a whole lot of bonus points to deal with the huge negation I have to give him for his really thin pegs. I've talked about the ones on the hands a whole bunch, but another one that's really frustrating is the one on the wrist, because when you're posing him, it's very easy to pull this off by accident. Also, one of these has way worse tolerance than one of the other ones. They're easily the worst offenders, although the wrists themselves are a little bit tenuous as well when they're holding accessories, and I just wish that those pegs were a bit more robust and a bit more powerful. It's a big problem for sure. But he does a whole lot to counteract it by having a lot of different play options in his various accessories. The Tomahawk sword, the Metal Beast machine cannon, all this stuff, and this stand, and the stand he's on right now. This guy does come with a lot. You do get your money's worth in pure plastic on this guy. So this has been Internet Personality Vangelus. I hope this review was enlightening to you. And I really don't know if this guy had a getter beam. I'm sorry, guys. I prostrate myself before the gods of Mecca.